We can learn to maintain mental clarity. We can learn to maintain calm while our body is in a state of stress. People who are just going for temperature and time eventually become cold adapted. They get very, very good at doing 3 minutes or 6 minutes or even 10 minutes at a given temperature. And so then they feel like they have to lower the temperature even more and even more. And eventually they just bottom out. There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere to get improvements out of the protocol, at least not in terms of mental resilience. There are cold protocols that have been tested in peer-reviewed studies that are designed to improve mental performance. They are designed to improve things like resilience or your grittiness or your ability to move through challenge or to regulate your mind and your internal state under conditions of stress. And we can define stress very specifically as times when adrenaline, also called epinephrine, and norepinephrine are elevated in your body. Noradrenaline and adrenaline are often co-released in the brain and body, so they work as kind of a pair to increase our level of agitation, our level of focus, and our desire and our ability to move. They are often co-released with dopamine, a molecule that is commonly misunderstood as the molecule of pleasure, but is actually the molecule of motivation, reward, and pursuit. So dopamine, norepinephrine, and noradrenaline tend to be released together under certain conditions. Your mental state is shifted when you are exposed to certain forms of cold. And many people use deliberate cold exposure specifically to shift their body state as a way to train their mental state so that they can better cope with stress in real life. It can also be used to elevate mood for long periods of time, anywhere from 2.5x, so 250%, to as high as 500%, 5 times over baseline. It turns out that these elevations in norepinephrine and dopamine are very long-lasting in ways that people report feeling vast improvements in mood and vast improvements in levels of cognitive attention and energy. The fact that cold exposure, deliberate or no, increases norepinephrine and epinephrine means that it is a very reliable stimulus for increasing norepinephrine and epinephrine. That obvious statement can be leveraged to systematically build up what we call resilience. So deliberate cold exposure is an opportunity to deliberately stress our body. And yet, because it's deliberate, we can learn to maintain mental clarity. We can learn to maintain calm while our body is in a state of stress. And that can be immensely useful when encountering stressors in other parts of life. And that's what we call resilience or grit, our ability to, or mental toughness, our ability to lean into challenge or to tolerate challenge while keeping our head straight, so to speak. So one simple protocol for increasing resilience is to pick a temperature that's uncomfortable, of shower or cold immersion, and then to get in for a certain duration of time, and then to get out. Now, it's important to understand that people will experience different levels of norepinephrine and adrenaline release when getting into cold water. Some people, because they dread the cold so much, will actually experience norepinephrine and epinephrine increases even before they get into the cold water or under the cold shower. And indeed, epinephrine and norepinephrine and its surges can be thought of as sort of walls that we have to confront and go over. And I'd like you to conceptualize them that way because it allows us to build protocols that can be very objective and can allow us to monitor our progress in terms of building resilience. One option is to simply say, okay, I'm going to force myself to get into the cold shower for 1 minute. When you get into the cold, you will experience a surge in epinephrine and norepinephrine. That's non-negotiable because it's mediated by cold receptors on the surface of your body and your skin, and the way that they trigger the release of norepinephrine and epinephrine, not just from the adrenals, but also from regions of your brain like the locus ceruleus, which cause increases in attention and alertness, and from other locations in your body where epinephrine and norepinephrine are released. In other words, cold is a non-negotiable stimulus for increasing epinephrine and norepinephrine. We have different levels of grit and resilience on different days, and depending on the landscape of our life at the time, even the time of day that we're doing these protocols, and start to be able to sense the release of epinephrine, and norepinephrine in our brain and body, and see those as walls that we want to climb over in order to build resilience, and to start counting the number of walls that we traverse and the distance between those walls as we do deliberate cold exposure. Norepinephrine and epinephrine release in the brain and body are the generic universal code for stressor. There is no unique chemical signature for different forms of stressors. That is the only one. So you could go for time, and you could try and reduce the temperature and increase the time. Now that's an attractive way to approach things, but the problem is that you don't have an infinite amount of room with which to lower temperature, because eventually you will get into temperatures that are either so cold that they are dangerous, or you have to stay in cold temperatures for such long periods that it becomes impractical, because presumably you also have to take care of other aspects of your life. You can't just sit all day in the ice bath. I favor a protocol in which you build mental resilience and mental toughness through two different types of protocols. The first one involves counting walls. Now, what do I mean by walls? I mean the sensation of, no, I don't want to do this, and the idea or the sensation in your brain and body that you actually want to leave that environment and go warm up. Now, again, for some people that will be even before getting into the ice bath or cold shower. So if you are feeling very resistant to getting into the ice bath or cold shower and you manage to do that, that's going over what I would call one wall, okay? Then for some period of time, you might actually feel comfortable in the ice bath, cold water, or cold shower, and you feel like you could stay there for some period of time, that you could stay there for a minute or 2 minutes, but inevitably, the next wall will arrive. And I would encourage you to pay attention to when that next wall arrives, and actually having an awareness, that so-called interoceptive awareness, as we call it, of when that next surge in adrenaline, epinephrine comes, or whether or not it reaches a certain threshold in your brain and body that you feel you want to get out, and you're able to stay in for even just 10 seconds longer. That means you've traversed yet another wall. My favorite protocol for building mental toughness, aka grit, aka resilience, is to take into account that some days just getting into the ice bath or cold shower represents a wall. Some days it doesn't. Some days you get in and you feel like you could go 10 minutes. Other days you get in and you feel like you could only go a minute. And setting a designated number of walls before you start the protocol is going to be very beneficial here. So you say, as long as I can do it safely, I'm going to do 3 walls today. The first wall is getting in, the second wall will arrive when it arrives, and the third wall will arrive when it arrives, and I'll get over that wall and then I'll get out. The next day you might do 5 walls. The next day you might do 3 walls again, but you might lower the temperature. This gives you tremendous flexibility, and indeed it gives you much more latitude to be able to use the same temperatures in different ways, or to reduce the temperature only a little bit and still get a lot of stimulus, meaning a lot of results out of a given protocol. Whereas people who are just going for temperature and time eventually become cold adapted. They get very, very good at doing 3 minutes or 6 minutes or even 10 minutes at a given temperature. And so then they feel like they have to lower the temperature even more and even more. And eventually they just bottom out. There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere to get improvements out of the protocol.